Dalid Yud Aleph.
Yeah, let's go.
If one finds a vessel on which was written Kaf, Korban, Mem Maaser, Dalit Damai, and Tet Tevel, and Tav Truma, since in times of danger they would write Tav instead of Truma. Rabbi Yossi says all of these names are people. Rabbi Yossi said even if one found a jar full of produce and Truma was written on it is Kulin, because we presume that last year it was full of Truma produce and he removed it. If one says to his son, Maaser Sheni is in that corner, and he found it in another corner, it's cooling. If there was a mana and he found 200 and the surplus is cooling, 200 and found a mana, all is Maaser. Kevin Ramai is marked with clods of earth, Orla with clay, and graves with lime, which he dissolves and pours out. Reb Shimon Gamil says, when does this apply? In the seventh year. The scrupulous put down money and say, whatever is gathered from this shall be redeemed with this money. Okay.
Okay. Right, now back to our Kerem Ravai, the fourth year vineyard. And interesting, we'll see reasons why we're speaking specifically about a vineyard as opposed to other produce, because other produce, most opinions hold it is also subject to fourth year. There are some opinions that revise specifically about a kerem, about grapes, but Lamaisa, we hold that it's that revai applies to all fruits. Okay. Kerem revai haya ole liYerushalayim mahalach yom echad lechol tzad. So Chazal made a takana that in that one day's journey from Yerushalayim, you should not redeem your grapes of the Kerem Revai, but rather you should bring them to Yerushalayim. And why did they do this? Because they during especially during the festival there were a lot of libations, there was lots of wine flowing, and what they wanted to do was make sure that that the prices wouldn't go up. So you know they know the laws of supply and demand. If people are bringing grapes from outside Yerushalayim, that's going to keep the prices low. So and he said bring it all, and then he'll start sharing with his friends, and they'll be able to have their grapes or grape juice. I think it may not be, or else he's bringing wine because
Right.
of course you could squeeze it and bring wine to Jerusalem, which would probably be easier than bringing the grapes. Okay. Um, so they made this takana that a day's journey from Yerushalayim you should not redeem it, you should rather bring it to Yerushalayim the actual product. So what is the boundary? So it gives some geographical markers. Eilat min hadarom. Okay, do not confuse this with modern day Eilat.
I was going to ask you,
That's not one day. That is not one day
oh,
journey. Um,
sure.
okay, so it's Eilat min hadarom, Akrabat min hatzafon. From the north is a place called Akrabat, and Lud min hamarav. Lud is probably the only place that we actually know more or less where it is now. The Hayardain min Mizrach, and the Jordan River from the east. Okay. Mishirabu aperos, however, there was a time of plenty, when there were lots of fruits. They they made a takana that they should that you could redeem it even up to the walls of Yerushalayim. Utanai haya hadavar. Now they didn't have to make a takana for this because that was the original halacha. And by the way, it had to they had to come back and revert it because it had to be a base. Once you made a based in that made the original ruling that you have to bring it from outside, you need an equal ruling, a ruling from a based in of equivalent stature. So it must have been of equivalent stature in order to undo the
Yeah.
first one. But they made a tanai on it. Tanai haya davar she'emas yirtzu yachzor hadavar lekemos shehaya. That if there would come a time when there wouldn't be so much produce, then the original takana would come back into effect that people should bring their produce in from a day's journey outside Yerushalayim. Okay, Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishecharav Beis Hamikdash Haya Hatanai Hazeh. They said he says your story is wrong. We're talking about we're talking about a situation where it was after the Churban Abayis, and therefore you couldn't bring all these libations, and the whole thing became irrelevant. That there was no point in making such a takana that people should bring into Yerushalayim. But the Tanai was. Emas Hashibaneh Beis Hamikdash Yachzor Hadavar Lekemos Shahaya. So then, Mi'at Hashem, when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, then the takana will come back into effect that Revai, that Kerem Revai must come to Yerushalayim from a day's journey around. Okay. Um, Gimel, mi Kerem Revai. So what's the halacha of Kerem Revai? We've actually seen this Mishnah in Eidos, um, because this is one of the chumras of Beis Hillel and the kolas of Beis Shammai. Kerem Revai Beis Shammai omrim ein lo chomesh ve'ein lo biur. Beis Hillel omrim yesh lo. It says Beis Shammai, if when you redeem it, you don't have to add the extra fifth, and there's no din of biur. Okay. Beis Hillel omrim yesh lo. So yes, you do have to pay the extra fifth, and you also have to do biur when it's time to when the time for biur comes. Okay. Beis Shammai omrim yesh lo peret v'yesh lo olelos. V'ha'aniyim podim la'atzmam. This is actually talking about the general thing of the matanos that are given to the poor. So this also includes shecha, peah, and leket, uh, which is so peret and olelos are basically peret is leket of grapes. So I'm not sure why the Mishnah chose to specify only those two, but basically anything that's supposed to be left for the aniyim, Beis Shammai say you do need to leave those for the aniyim, and but you have to leave them a siman that this is fourth year, and therefore they need to redeem it and take it to Yerushalayim. Okay, but Beis Hillel omrim kulo lagas, and Beis Hillel say that the whole thing is basically kodesh. There's an aspect of kedusha to this, which means that once it's got kedusha, there's no din of matanos la'aniyim, not the shikha peah leket, not peret, not olelos. It's all belongs to the owner, but it's all got the din of kedusha of Rabbi. Dalid. Ketzad podin neteravai. So how do you do the pidyon? Much like Maaser Sheni. Okay. Meniach es asal al pi shlosha. So you put down a basket of produce in front of three people who are going to assess the value. Okay. V'omer kama adam yotze lifdos lo besela al menas leotzi yetzios mi beiso. So how much would a person redeem these grapes for, assuming that he'd have to take the expenses in producing it or taking it to the market
Right.
out of his own pocket? So, in other words, what is the raw value of the produce without taking into account the tircha of bringing it to the market? Because if it's just the market price, the fully inclusive market price, you don't need three people to come and assess it. You just see what the price in the market. So this we've now got to deduct the value of how much it took to get it to the market. Okay, and so they give him an assessment and say, okay, this is how much a basket of grapes is worth. So it says everything that's been harvested from my field is redeemed onto this money at the price of X per basket.
Okay.
And that's
Okay.
so this is it's a much larger quantity than you'd normally have for Maaser Sheni. Maaser Sheni is only a tenth of your produce. This is now the whole kerem has now been redeemed. So it's 10 times as much as you would have Maaser Sheni in a regular year.
Okay. All right. Lot.
Okay,
Okay.
and we can head back.
Maaser Sheni, Gimel, Gimel. If
Yes.
one have money in Jerusalem and needs it, and his fellow has produce, he can say to his fellow, "This money is in exchange for your produce." Thus, this one eats his produce in the state of
Uh,
produce in Jerusalem and money in the country. He may say, "This money is in exchange for that produce." Money in Jerusalem and produce in the country, he may say, "This money is in exchange for that produce," provided the produce is taken up and eaten in Jerusalem. Money brought into Jerusalem may be taken out again, but produce brought in may not be taken out again. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says produce brought in may also be taken out again, and the halakha is not like Rabbi Gamliel, so it wouldn't make sense. Okay,
yeah.
okay, and we are
Shumos es Yudalef.
okay. Regarding both this and that, Rabbi Yeshua said, "This is not the truma which I am bidden not to render unclean, only which I may not eat, and which I may not render unclean. If it was passing from one place to another with loaves of truma in his hands, and a non-Jew said to him, 'Give me one, and I shall render it unclean, and if not, I shall render it all unclean.'" Rabbi Eliezer says, "Let him render all unclean, and let him not give him one to render it unclean." Rabbi Yeshua says, "Let him place one before him on a stone." If so too, women to whom non-Jews said, give us one of you, and we shall defile her. Otherwise, we shall defile all of you. Let all of them be defiled, and let not them hand over one to the Israelite soul. If one sowed truma, if in error, he must plow it over, but if willfully, he must let it grow. If it reached a third of its growth, whether in error or willfully, he must let it grow. And in the case of flax, if willfully, he must plow it over. Okay.
Okay.
Mhm. To
Demand
mine.
valid hay.
If one says to one who is not trustworthy in regard to Maestros, buy from me from one who is trustworthy, and from him who tithes, he is not trusted. For so and so, he is trusted. If he went to buy from him, and he said to him, I did not find him, and I brought you for another who is trustworthy, he is not trusted. If one enters a city and knows no one there, and he said, Who is trustworthy here, who separates the tithes here? A person said to him, I. He is not to be believed. If he said to him, So and so is trustworthy, he may be believed. If he went to buy from him and said to him, who sells here old? He said to him, The one who sent you to me. Though they may appear to be exchanging favors, they may be believed. And if donkey drivers enter the city and one said, Mine is new, but my friend's is old, mine is not tithe, but my friend's is tithe, they are not believed. And Rabbi Yehuda says they are believed.
Okay.
And if one buys from a baker, how does one tithe?
Oh, wait,
If
wait.
it
No, we're done. We're done there. We're going to
went too
Nagayim.
far, I went too far. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, and the guy, test base. A bahar is the size of a grist, contains living skin the size of a lentil. If it covers him completely and then the living skin disappears, or if the living skin disappears and then the navel covers him completely, the 50th person is tahor. The living skin appeared in a completely expanded nega. He is tameh. If white hair appeared on it, Rabbi Yeshua renders it tameh, and the sages say it's tahor. A baharis with white hair that was subsequently covered him completely is tahor, even though the white hair remains. A baharis that expanded and subsequently covered him completely is tahor. In all of these cases become tameh if the extremities return. If it is spread partially, he is tameh, and if it covered him completely, he is tahor. Whenever extremities spread completely and the spreading rendered the tameh tahor, when they return, they render him tameh. When extremities return and the returning render the tahor tameh, if they became covered with nega, he is tahor. If they became uncovered, he is tameh, and even 100 times.
Okay.
Okay. Avos.
Other standard tests.
Alatep. Rav Yonanan says, whoever fills the Torah despite poverty will ultimately fulfill it in wealth, but whoever neglects Torah because of wealth will ultimately neglect it in poverty. Rameya says, limit your business activities and engage in Torah study. Be of humble spirit before every person. If you should neglect the study of Torah, you will be confronted with many causes of neglect, but if you labor in the Torah, he has ample reward to give you. Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov says, he who fulfills even a single mitzvah requires for himself a single advocate, while he who commits even a single transgression requires for him a single accuser. Repentance and good deeds are like a shield against misfortune. Hog Yochanan Sanla says, every assembly that is dedicated to the sake of heaven will endure, but one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure.
Okay.
And we have vamos. Okay. Yud Gimel Yud Base. If a minor Ravim cohabitated with a minor Yavrama, he must wait for each other to grow up. If they cohabitated with an adult Yavama, he must wait for him to grow up. If a Yavama stated that within 30 days he did not cohabitate with me, we compels him to perform Chalitza with her. If she stated this after 30 days, we request of him that he perform Chalitza with her. However, if he admits to it that even after 12 months, we coerce him to perform Chalitza with her. If a woman vowed not to derive benefit from a yavam, if she vowed so during her husband's lifetime, we coerce him to perform kalitza with her. If she vowed so after her husband's death, we request of him that he perform kalitza with her. However, if she intended this, and even if she vowed during her husband's lifetime, we only request of him that he perform kalitza with her. If a deaf-mute man married a competent woman, or a competent man married a deaf-mute woman, if he wishes, he may divorce her, and if he wishes, he may retain her. Just as he marries by gesturing, so may he divorce by gesturing. If a competent man married a competent woman and she became a deaf mute, if he wishes, he may divorce her, and if he wishes, he may retain her. If she became insane, he may not divorce her. If he became deaf, mute, or insane, he may never divorce her. Rav Yochanan Nori says, What is it that a wife who became a deaf mute may be divorced, but a husband who became deaf mute may not be divorced? They replied, a husband who divorces is not comparable to a wife who is divorced, since a wife who is divorced may be divorced without her consent, while a husband cannot divorce except by his consent.
Okay.
Okay.
And we done.